Hello, everyone. This is your host, Susan Rosen, and my guest today is Jacob Kendall, and he has a really interesting history and a really interesting view. And I'm not exactly sure what the other word would be, but with both his own experience and with us older people. So, Jacob, welcome, and tell us a little more about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. I'm glad to be having this conversation. I appreciate the opportunity. I typically boil down my description of myself to two primary parts of my identity, if you will. One is on the personal side, but it does affect what I do professionally, and that's that I've had two open heart surgeries. I have a it was a congenital valve disorder that runs in my mom's side of the family. And so they saw it at age 3. So I have lifelong experience navigating our overly absurd labyrinthine medical system. And obviously, how it affects my own morbidity and mortality. And then definitely the professional side, my formal training is what I say is truly interdisciplinary, which is very important. It's the most important thing to me about my training across the natural and social sciences and humanities with some theology as well. So I've studied and have degrees in biology, social work, public health, and my PhD is technically interdisciplinary aging studies. That's way too many syllables. So I just say gerontology because that's what gerontology is anyway, is the interdisciplinary study of aging.
Right.
And I'm currently working on a degree in theology. And so there's obviously a lot of overlap between chronic disease and aging. Most chronic diseases are diseases of conditions of aging. And so, without question, my own personal experiences have informed my professional journey in focusing on aging and focusing on chronic disease. I consider myself a chronic disease advocate. I speak and do workshops on that. And specifically with gerontology, I refer to myself as a public health gerontologist, which I'm betting we'll get into at some point. So that's a brief summary of me.
Well, that's a lot to have done in the short life that you've been around. I know I'm sure it feels like a lot longer, but
Sometimes it does. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, no, you've accomplished quite a bit. I'm very impressed. Um, so tell us a little bit about, your own um well, it's not a disease, um your own experience with all of the surgeries and all of that, because like you say, I mean, that's something that especially older people start really getting into. And I think having your viewpoint on it would be very valuable.
Yeah, there's obviously so much that I could say. One thing that comes to mind, you are correct. And so I'm in a Facebook group of people who have had these kinds of surgeries. And, I obviously have looked on WebMD and other things way too much, but I also read scholarly articles. And,
uh,
a common question comes up of, well, the survivability after getting a valve replacement is not that high, but you have to remember that the vast majority of people who are studied are older adults. It's much more expensive to follow people who had these surgeries in their 20s and 30s. And so I just have to remind myself and put things in context that there are relatively few people who have had them at my ages. And, because of these surgeries, both my wife and I have life insurance policies that we got soon after we got married a few years ago. And mine is much more restricted than hers. When it started, it was at 22 years because that's the most they were willing to give me because of my surgeries. And I often joke that, when I'm around in 23 years, I would love to call them and it would love for it to be the same person. Um, so I have to consider these different things and put things into proper context.
mhm.
I also do think that it helps me be able to relate to other people with chronic disease, most of whom are older adults. And so obviously I can't claim the identity of being older, but I definitely can claim a lot of the health related stuff. And so I try to use that to relate to older adults who have chronic disease.
Yep. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's yeah, people, I think older people, like most people at different ages, I mean, teenagers are the same way, right? Well, you don't understand what we're doing, right? You're just an old guy, or you're just a young guy, or or whatever. But I think that one of the things that you point out or bring up is that it's really the same experience going across all the ages. It's just the specifics that kind of change, you know.
Yeah, one there are various perspectives that scholars take on aging, and I tend to adopt the lifespan perspective, as in
Mhm.
technically when you're born, you begin aging at that point. And
Yeah.
I think I don't know if you're familiar with ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. There's a lot of research on those, and the things that happen to us
Mhm.
in early, especially if they're very adverse
Oh.
early childhood, can affect us decades later. So
Oh
I
my
find
God,
the
yeah.
lifespan perspective of aging to be really useful, and that prevents us from simply putting people into boxes, and
Yeah.
it helps us be able to realize, you know what, even people at different stages of life cycle, like the, there's some relatability there.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that well, I think I don't know whether it's just human beings or it's just our society that tends to like to put people into boxes,
Yeah,
um,
for
which is
sure.
not helpful.
Yeah, that's another topic I know we could go very deeply into. And we live in a very polarizing time. So what you just said is far
Oh
too
yeah.
true, unfortunately.
Yeah. 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 No, it's done nothing but get worse, at least in my lifetime, you
Yeah,
know.
agreed.
And I've been around for a while, so getting to be one of the older ones these days.
Well, even that definition, there's a lot of debate about whether that should change. Of course, our
Yeah.
technical age for older age is 65 because that's our pensionable age, and the United Nations
Right.
sets it at 60 for worldwide. But my research in the PhD program was to,
Uh-huh.
and I'm still doing some research on it, is to study
Uh-huh.
aging in rural Malawi, which was it's a Southern African country. It's one
Uh-huh.
of the poorest countries in the world, and there was a lot of research showing that disabilities and morbidity set in for people in Malawi at younger ages compared to people in settings like ours because they
Okay.
rely so much on subsistence agriculture. It's just they have a much
Uh,
higher infectious disease burden. So these things affect everyone. And so I actually I defined older adults in my research as 45 years and older. And I tell
wow.
people that here, and they're like, whoa, that's young, but it's different context, right? And there's a lot of debate
Yeah.
about whether we should increase that age, what defines older age here, for economic reasons and other reasons.
Right.
It's getting to the point now where people live an entire third of their lives in retirement.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, and with Medicare and all of those issues and the anyways, yeah. Yeah, well that is part of the problem, right? Overall in a lot of
Yeah,
ways is that we're still living with a culture and a I don't want it's not government, but of that people are old at 60.
yeah,
And there's so many people who don't even want to stop working at 60,
yeah,
let alone 70,
right.
you know, where it
And,
used to be. Yeah, no, no, go ahead.
well, and that's just talking about economic productivity.
Yes.
But I mean, what we're seeing now is people who are in older age are providing caregiving for their parents in older age. And so you put all this together and basically the dynamics are changing.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And and unfortunately we're not doing real well at changing to go along with it. Not us, but I mean our the
Yeah.
whole culture.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
So that's a whole nother discussion. um so okay, so tell us a little bit about your studies in gerontology and and all of that, and how does it relate to us? How does it is what you're doing, you know, um, helping us?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first things they told us in the PhD program, it's a little bit different than like if I were to go get something, a doctorate in biology or sociology, which is disciplinary. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. I'm glad that we
Yeah.
have those true experts. I personally would rather be a jack of all trades, so I like it. But on day one of the program, they said the most important thing that you're going to have coming out of this program is to be able to facilitate dialogue across disparate disciplines, and it's more than molecular biologists and geneticists working with one another. Let's try to connect the dots between that and psychology and cognitive neuroscience and sociology and demography and epidemiology and history and ethics and architecture, all related to aging. And I
Yeah.
love that. I love connecting the dots across these wide swaths of knowledge. And of course, yes, I acknowledge that I have to sacrifice expertise in one particular area to do that, but we need both disciplinary and interdisciplinary folks. Um, and so I took courses in all those things when I was in the program, but we still had to focus on one topic specifically. And so where that gets to my own professional identity, I mentioned earlier, I think I did that I consider myself a public health gerontologist. And so to get to your question of the functionality here, like how does this actually play a role in addressing some of these issues? I was trained by a demographer, and so my comfort spot, and I have a social work degree, but I never wanted to be a therapist. I never wanted to work one-on-one or be a clinician. My comfort spot is really analyzing what these issues are from a bird's eye view. We have to be able and willing to zoom out beyond just the individual part of it. And speaking of our society, I would say that American individualism has run amok. A common response I hear when I talk about, well, our healthcare system is embarrassing, and we really need to take a look at revising it. And of course, most other post-industrial countries have universal or socialized or national health care, whatever you want to call it. We're the only one, I think we're the only one that doesn't. But a common response I get is, well, I don't want to lose my individual choice in choosing my provider. And I always have two internal responses to people who
Uh-huh.
say that. First of all, there's no way you have chronic disease. There's no way. And two, the whole thing about having individual liberty and choosing your provider is an illusion. All right. And so let me give an example for me personally. And I think that
Uh-huh.
this is indicative of how thinking and being able to zoom out can help older adults and families and whatnot. So I live in one of the fastest growing areas in the US. This is a rapidly growing area. And you don't have to drive in this area for more than 5 minutes to see evidence of that. There are constantly neighborhoods and apartment complexes going up. And we've only been here for, I think, 3 years. Um, and we already see some evidence of this, how this area lacks infrastructure to handle that population growth. Last year we had a long water shortage. Okay, that's one example. So for me, I have many different providers. I have cardiologists, electrophysiologists, neurologists, colorectal surgeon, physical therapy, pain doctor, etc. Dental health is really important to protect my valves. So all these different
Yeah.
providers, and it became clear over time from having constant visits and regular checkups and whatnot that, wow, I have to schedule these appointments many months in advance, or they'll tell me, oh yeah, their schedule's all filled up and whatnot.
Yep. Yep.
And so it didn't take too long to start to connect the dots, right? If you just focus on the individual level, then of course it's easy for me to get frustrated that I have a hard time scheduling an appointment with the doctor. But if you zoom out just a little bit, you realize that the fact that there is rapid demographic growth here is tied to decreasing access to healthcare. Those two are directly related, but you can't know that until you
Yeah.
zoom out and look at the larger level, right?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
that's just one example of what I mean when I say public health gerontologists. We have to be willing to zoom in and out to these different levels and don't get mired in the individualism, which it's so deeply embedded in our bone marrow to
Oh my
focus on the
God.
individualistic level, but we are going to fail to address these problems if we get stuck
Hmm.
there.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, yeah. And unfortunately, at least for the US, right, is that medical care is big business. It's not medical care as such. It's big business. And they're there. If they can't make any money, then they're not going to be there. And
Yeah.
that's one of the downsides of our country.
I think it's a massive downside. I mean,
Yeah.
human bodies essentially are treated like commodities here.
Oh my God,
Our
yeah.
system wants us and needs us to be sick. And there's no incentive for people at the top to make these changes. And I'm going to be honest,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'm a chronic disease advocate, and I definitely spend a lot of my time working on trying to make these changes. But there are definitely a lot of moments when I just have to sit with the
Yeah.
fact that healthcare seems like a very intractable problem.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree. I totally agree. And I'm pretty healthy, you know, but even so, you go in to see the doctor and you get 15 minutes. And that's it. It's like you have to prioritize what your issues are and you can't go in very often, you
Yeah,
know. And
yeah,
I'm on Medicare. So,
mm,
it's you can tell that they know that there's this aging population because they're all zooming in on Medicare, you know.
yeah. And most health insurance companies base their policies on what Medicare and Medicaid do. So even though we have a system that relies largely on private health insurance, there's
Yeah.
focusing on Medicare and Medicaid and improving that would have a lot of ripple effects out. And we're very resistant to that because we're not a welfare loving society.
No.
Uh, so these are going to be major issues moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, I think it's the other issue that comes out of that as well is that I think I think that the that whole cadre of people getting older, right, are actually in better shape than their parents were at that age, right? But what comes as a big surprise to them, number one, is the cost, and number two is really the lack of care, you know, and and I think that's gonna be huge. It's gonna be huge because, as everybody knows, there's this big elephant that's going through the snake.
The pig and the python is actually one of the common terms used, and that's
Right.
exactly what's
Yeah.
happening demographically.
Hmm. Oh no,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Because I'm at the tail end of the baby boomers. I'm 69, so I see all these other things, and my older brothers and my husband, and who are all older than I am, and I'm just watching it, going, oh shit, you know.
Yeah.
What happens when I get to where they are? Oh my God.
I think "oh shit" is a very apt phrase to use, and
Yeah.
I want to take the time to point out, and this is again is why I think we have to have interdisciplinary perspectives in medicine.
Hmm.
And so I've already said that, and it seems like you agree that the medicine or healthcare is way more than just individualistic, but it's
Oh yeah.
also way more than medical, right?
Yes. Yes.
And a lot of the reasons that people have higher quality of lives, because you're right, I mean, we're healthier than our parents and their parents were, but a lot of that is because of things going on outside of the medical system. We realize
Hmm.
that we need to be exercising, we realize that we need to be eating more healthily, et cetera, et cetera. And those are
That's right.
non-medical things. Medicine is not about preventing things. We're getting better at that. But and the other thing I want to mention is none of this, whether it's aging as an individual or aging as our population, both of which are occurring, none of that happens in a vacuum. And
No.
I wish that more people realized that any of these issues with aging, chronic disease, our medical system, they all intersect with every other issue. So I'll mention one. It's one of my
Hmm.
favorite examples to give is immigration, right? And of course, that's a hot button topic. I'm not getting into that here, but I want to mention one way in which this is clearly related to the fact that we're experiencing population aging. So, one of the main industries that many migrants, many of whom come from Latin America, one of the main industries that they go into is home health care. And of
Yeah.
course, Americans want to die in their own homes and not in facilities, which is totally
Yeah.
understandable. So do I. And so for those who can afford not to have to go into a facility, not to have to go into a nursing home, et cetera, the most expensive option, but the one that's best, is to pay for home health care. And a rapidly growing percentage of home health care persons are immigrants from
Hmm.
somewhere, usually from Latin
Right.
America, oftentimes from Africa as well.
Yeah.
When my dad was debilitated from a stroke, most of his caregivers were from another country. And we can compare it to a place like Japan, one of the oldest countries in the world, one of the highest life expectancies in the world. They're very quickly, like a speeding train, headed toward a really serious demographic issue because they're very monocultural. They're super unfriendly to immigration there. I mean, we're relatively friendly to immigration, believe it or not. They are extremely
Yeah. No, we
unfriendly to
are. Yeah.
immigration to the point that they have a big problem with how they're going to provide for their older adults right now for their aging population because who's going to do that? They're having fewer
Mhm.
children, and so they don't have children and grandchildren to care for them. And there actually are a lot of politicians there who are like, we need to open up to immigration or whatnot. So my point is,
Um,
without getting into the politics of these
yeah.
issues,
No,
I
no, no.
simply
Not,
want to
not whether it's
show.
good or bad or whatever, just
Right.
that
I
it
simply want
is.
to show that
Yeah.
these issues interact with one another. That's my point. And
Uh-huh.
aging does not occur in a vacuum. And if we fail to see that, we will fail to address these problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And um, you know, this, the interesting thing as well is that the whole baby boomer generation was, out in the streets trying to make change, right? Or a good percentage of them, let's put it that way. Um, and and I think there aren't that many of them left, and B, the ones that are left are so tired of having to fight against all of this
Yeah. Yeah.
that they're like, you know what? You take care of it. You don't want us to help? Not a problem. We'll go
Yeah.
off and spend the rest of our lives doing something else.
I would love to be in a
Yeah.
society where they can just go off and
Yeah.
spend time with grandchildren or travel or whatever. We don't currently live in that society where enough people can
No.
realize that aspiration, but it would be great if they could.
Oh yeah. No, no, absolutely. Absolutely. But they're very tired of, having to push against it, not just for themselves, but for their families. Um, yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't know. I think the next 10 or 15 years are going to be a very interesting time with a lot of changes, and I don't know which way it's going to go, but I think it's going one way or the other. So
Yeah. Technology and communications are advancing rapidly,
yes.
which comes with both its good and bad side. There's a concept I usually see it referred to as intimacy at a distance,
Mm,
which with all the migration that's going on, people are moving,
mhm.
is really, really good. But that because of advances in communications, it's easier to maintain attachments to people who geographically live distant from you. Zoom and FaceTime and things like that are the kinds of things I'm talking about. And there's no way to let me rephrase it to use positive language. We have every reason to believe that advances in things like AI and other things like that are definitely going to be tied up with our healthcare and
Oh
aging
yeah.
and things like that. There's no way that they're not going to be.
Oh yeah. They are to a large degree already. People don't even realize
Yeah,
how
yeah,
much, you know. So yeah, that's a whole different mess. But it's it's going to be interesting. it's going to be very interesting. I think the next 10, 15 years are going to be a lot of changes, but
Yeah.
we don't know.
Well,
We don't know what.
it's going to be interesting regardless, but that's a valueless adjective. What I
Mhm.
don't know and why it's going to be interesting is because I don't know which direction it's headed. I think we have
Yeah.
a real opportunity to make some positive changes, but I also think that many people wouldn't be surprised if it goes the opposite direction. And again, that's what makes it interesting. I really
Yeah.
I don't know where we're going to go with it. We do have an opportunity to do something positive, though, and
Yeah.
face these issues. We've seen examples of the past of other societies responding to predicted and inevitable demographic changes. So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting time, as they say. May you isn't that a excuse me, what's the right word? Wasn't that a thing that they used to say that, we're like, ah, can't think of what it is, you know, like not a good blessing, the opposite. What's the opposite?
Hers, maybe?
Um, yeah, yeah, that's a curse that they used to say, may you live in interesting times.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, sometimes no news is good news, but we're not without news these days.
Yeah, 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 exactly, exactly. So do you have, maybe like three or four things that you want to just kind of touch on, that people need to kind of watch out for, or learn more about, or, you know, for those of us that are older?
Yeah. Well, so what I do is do talking and workshops and maybe
Hmm.
get into some writing in the future on one is the interdisciplinary piece and how we have to have that, but the other is more on the local individual level is demystifying healthcare. And over time of dealing with all the bullshit of healthcare, I mean, push came to shove, and so I want to shove back, but I've kind of figured out these um, strategies, some things that have been useful for me. Like you said, if you have a 15-minute visit with a provider, squeeze all the juice you can out of it, right?
Yeah.
And I've just kind of picked up some of these strategies that have been both helpful for me as a patient and in a caregiving
Mm.
capacity.
Oh, that'd
And
be great.
it helps keep me centered, knowing or believing that healthcare at a larger scale is an intractable problem. But at the very least, we can as individuals practice better self-advocacy. It can be easy to get to a place where you feel downtrodden and in despair about the intractable nature of our healthcare
Yeah.
system. But there's still some things we can do at the local level, or at least with ourselves and our loved ones that are
Uh-huh.
good strategies. And so that is something that I speak on, and I do come in with more of a public health perspective, like I said, and that's my
Right.
sweet spot. But I still want to realize, you know what? Let's uh let's also focus on some things that you can do as an individual, even
Yeah.
amidst uh the like I said, the intractable nature of the problem at a larger
Hmm.
scale. And I
Yeah.
often find myself wondering, we definitely can do more at the individual and family level. But as we keep going up the ladder and zooming farther out, eventually we reach a point where it's a brick wall. And I'm wondering where exactly that brick wall is. I used to get really frustrated with physicians and providers until I realized that they're just as frustrated with health insurance companies as
Yeah.
we are. And
Right.
so I don't think that they're largely to blame. And of course, you have some who just don't seem to care about, they don't want to talk to you, and it's the last thing they want to do, and they just want to rush out of the room. But that's more of a personality thing. That's not a product of the system. And
Yeah.
so, obviously finding physicians, as my brother put it, my brother was recently diagnosed with Crohn's disease. We have a lot of chronic disease in my family, and he said he
Wow.
prefers
Yeah.
providers who are curious rather than judgmental. So,
Ah, interesting.
to
Yeah.
to what degree we have any choice in that, find providers who are curious.
Yeah.
And I think that's really great insight. So I've stopped putting a lot of the blame on physicians themselves, and I've started to realize, that it really, you have to zoom out even more to really realize where the source of the problem is. Um, so I don't know where the real solutions are going to come in, but I would
Yeah.
say that there are some strategies we can do to kind of squeeze more out of our own individual care.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I would agree. I think one of the things, just as an example, that I've found is that before I go in, either to talk on the phone or actually go in person to see my doctor, I make myself a list so I don't forget. All of these things are what I need to talk about, and I get it down so that I can get it into my 15 or 20 minutes. Right.
Yep.
Yeah, because otherwise, you can go like this and then you don't get much of what you're questioning. You don't get many answers.
Yeah, I have the Notes app on my iPhone, and I have a note that is questions I want to ask my next medical provider. And whenever I think of one, even if it's 5 months away before I'll see them, I try to remind myself to go ahead and put that question on now, because I'll forget it.
Yeah.
And then 5 minutes after I walk out of the office, I'll be like, damn, I wish I had remembered
Yeah.
that.
Oh, I forgot. Oh, I forgot to ask
Yeah.
about that. Oh, I
Yeah.
forgot about this. Yes. Yes.
And I
Absolutely.
also help my mom. She's been surprised sometimes when I relate she also has the same heart disease. That's what, like I said,
Oh,
travels
okay.
on my mom's side of the family. And so we're both constantly going to see providers, and I'll relate a story of like, oh, I just got out of the appointment with the cardiologist or whatever. And I tell her how it went. She's like, you said that to him? I'm like, yeah, you're damn right. I'm going to advocate for myself. So I've also, helped her and helped other loved ones like, hey,
Good.
try this little thing and see if it squeezes a little more juice out of that.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Maybe you need to write a book.
You're not the first person to tell me that. So I go back and forth on what's the best way to kind of make some inroads. I have people tell me to start a podcast. I've had people tell me to write a book. I don't know the answer to that. If you figure it out, let me know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, podcasting takes a bit of time. So unless you've got a lot of people to do everything and all you have to do is go in and talk, you're fine. But otherwise,
Yeah, that's the impression I get.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So,
Which makes me appreciate more that there are podcasts like this one. I appreciate you having these conversations,
well,
and
thank
I'm
you.
sure that this helps a lot of people out. So yeah, I'm glad just to be a part of this conversation today.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I enjoy, in case you haven't figured it out, I enjoy talking to people. Drives my husband crazy because I talk to anybody, anywhere about anything.
Yeah.
So just interest. Excuse me. And so I'm always interested in finding out new things that people are doing. Like a lot of the stuff that you're doing are things that I don't necessarily. You kind of think, oh, this big, huge subject, but it's like everything. There's always little things in it that make it up, and that's where the interesting things are.
Yeah. And I think that you're doing that is a good model for especially younger people to see. I don't know if your audience has many younger listeners. I hope that it
Some
does,
it has some.
but that's good because I
Yeah.
think a lot of younger people have this notion, which essentially contributes to ageism, that older adults don't want to continue learning and they don't have interest, but that's just not true. So I think that you showing that you have interest in these other
Yeah.
topics is a great model for the fact that I think that's true of many people at all ages, and
Yeah.
you should continue learning. That's a
Oh,
great
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree. So unless if you have anything else that you want to wrap up with, or if we've come to that point now, I will close off the podcast. What do you think? Anything else you want to throw out there?
No, I think we covered some good points. Like you said, any
Yeah.
one of these things we could go down a much longer path. And
Yeah.
I look forward to staying in touch. My website is
Yeah.
jacobevanskendall.com. That's where I talk about the speaking that I do. But
Okay.
otherwise, I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate you being on. And I will get Jacob's information and put it in the show notes. So if anyone does want to reach out, go to the show notes and you'll have all the information there. So, okay. So, excuse me. Thank you, number one. And I will finish up as I do on all of my podcasts, which is that neither of us are doctors. This is not to be seen as medical advice. And I will be seeing everybody else next week.